Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me for this session. And I'm going to talk about CSR is not PR. They are two different things. What I can say is that you're all in the right room at the right time because corporate social responsibility, also known as CSR, is changing the way we do business, is changing the way that brands are creating their campaigns, and it's also driving consumers to make conscious choices. Everything I'm going to share with you today is from my book that I wrote in 2020. I don't know how I managed to write a book in 2020, but it's been very timely. The book published in 2021, and it was shortlisted for the Business Book Awards in 2022. So David Attenborough has described saving the planet as a communications issue. And you might say, what's that got to do with comms? What's that got to do with PR? What's that got to do with business or brands? It's got everything to do with the planet. Without the planet, there is no business. And just to sort of emphasize that, last week I did a talk with somebody online. He's a CEO, a founder of an organization called We Don't Have Time. His name is Ingmar Rentzhog, and we broadcast that chat on Twitter at 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon. By 7 o'clock that Thursday, it had just under 500,000 views. So it shows that people really do care about how brands are operating and how brands are taking care of the planet. So what is corporate social responsibility, CSR? It's a word that we've heard bandied about, but I'm sure we don't really understand what it means. I like to describe it very simply. Corporate social responsibility is the relationship a brand or a business has with the local community that it operates in and its wider relationship with the planet. It's also a set of values. These are brand values that we understand what brand values are. They will be a set of initiatives or activities that a brand will say it's committed to. These can be from saying it's an honest brand, it believes in fair trade, it believes in diversity and inclusion, like we've just heard from Megan. It could be that we're reducing a carbon footprint. But the key thing is the brand has to be authentic about these initiatives. And what's different is these brand values are not just baked into the brand, it's baked into the business strategy. So when it's baked into the business strategy, it means it will flow throughout the organization. HR will be joined up in the thinking on the CSR initiatives. The financial team will be joined up on who it's partnering with supply chains. Corporate social responsibility doesn't stand on its own. It needs to be integrated. And this is where CSR hasn't really been understood before because it was never implemented at the heart of a business strategy. And I just want to take you back to 2019. It seems like a lifetime ago. But in 2019, we didn't really understand corporate social responsibility. It was the poor cousin, the poor relation. It didn't even have a budget. It used to be bolted on to human resources as a team-building exercise, or it was bolted on to comms to make a brand look good, or a brand or a business would partner with a charity because it made the organization, the business look brilliant. But CSR is far more than that, and it's changed fundamentally since the pandemic. Now, I know the pandemic has been really hard, but where it has had a positive, it is with corporate social responsibility. It's really galvanized the whole structure of it. It's no longer a trend. Data after data is proving that consumers want businesses to do better. And there's two surveys that I like to just quote from that came out in 2020, but just shows how relevant they were. One is by Edelman. It's a well-known PR company. Edelman published something called the Edelman Trust Barometer, which showed 70% of consumers around the world in 2020 wanted companies, wanted brands to be doing better. The other survey I like to quote from is the Zeno Global Survey, which went out into 8 different markets. It surveyed 1,000 people. 75% of those respondents, those consumers, said they were voting with their wallet of where they wanted to buy, what brands they would be loyal to, and 76% said they wanted to see CEOs walk their talk. So CEOs to really be imbibing the business. The other thing that happened during the pandemic is it's really expanded what corporate social responsibility means. And we had the Black Lives Matter movement come about. So CSR does now include diversity and inclusion. It also includes well-being. We're now all working from home. We want our businesses, we want our brands to be working in our interest. CSR also attracts talent, it keeps talent, and the next generation of consumers, they want to buy from those brands that are purposeful. The other thing I would say about CSR is that investors look for CSR-led brands to invest in because they are less risk. Can anyone guess what the correlation might be between these two images? Anyone like to just shout out anything? Hazard a guess? Technology. In the past when I've used this, people say, is it because we sit on the loo and look at our phone? But in 2012, the UN brought out a report to say more people in the world had access to a mobile phone than they did to a toilet. And what does that mean for brands and for brands and businesses? It means more and more of us are online, we're shopping online, we're looking to see what brands are doing. Also during the pandemic, what I forgot to say is when we were all sat at home, we were all looking at brands and what brands were doing. And certain brands were doing better than governments in pivoting on supplies, on the supplies for frontline workers. And luxury brands did very well during the pandemic because they really pivoted. So brands like Chanel, Louis Vuitton stopped producing high-end luxury, and they started to produce hand sanitizers and masks for frontline workers. So social media is really now playing a role in corporate social responsibility, and it means you have to be aligned, you have to be authentic with your CSR values, your activities. If not, this happens. And it's so easy now for a brand to be cancelled, to be called out, because we are online, we're all watching. There are so many stories of brands that have been caught out for greenwashing. One of my favourites, going back to the pandemic, you might remember in March 2020, while we're all stuck at home, boohoo.com was called out for how it was treating its employees. Up in Birmingham, there was no social spacing, and they weren't even being paid the minimum wage. When that story came out, when it broke on the news, boohoo.com's shares plummeted, and they were forced to really look at their sustainability. So how does that all work within PR? How do we use it? How do we do it well? And it starts with storytelling. We are a species that loves stories. We started from storytelling right back in the cave. So it's really to understand your brand. Go back, do the research, look at the brand. Look why did the brand start in the first place? Look at that. Is the brand still doing those initiatives, or is it doing it better, or has it changed? And remember, it's about authentic storytelling. It's not about fairy tales. The other thing with your storytelling is to really listen to your customers, your clients. Find out what are they saying about the brand. How are they responding to the brand? What's the passion of the brand? All that is part of your authentic CSR storytelling. And everyone forgets this in PR, in comms, and that's the internal communications. This is critical for all businesses. it's actually the secret sauce. We always forget, in PR, we take our story, we go out with it, we contact the media, but in what we find is maybe within the organization, not many people really understand what the CR activities are, what the brand is actually trying to do. Is it committed to diversity and inclusion? That isn't aligned internally. So internal comms is really important, and it needs to be up, down, sideways, holistic. Your CEO needs to understand. Sometimes CEOs don't understand what the CSR initiatives are. It's important that your HR team understands. Is your supply chain honest and transparent, if that's what you're talking about? Is your supply chain looking at its carbon reduction? Is your supply chain recycled? Is your board diverse and inclusive, if that's what your key message is? So within CSR, internal communications is so critical. It's not just about the external story. And believe it or not, when you let CSR lead within the PR strategy, it flows, it's seamless, it really comes into its own. And I can tell you about so many brands that haven't paid for PR, they haven't paid on advertising, they've just let the brand speak for itself, and they've been really transparent and honest. One brand is a very small beauty brand, a well-being brand, and it's an Indian brand that entered the UK market using an Indian philosophy of well-being. That in itself is a very difficult message to penetrate into the market. But what they said was that we aren't doing everything right. Give us time and we will. But this is what we do, and this is what we commit to you as our consumer. And they've created that loyalty. And the consumer, their consumers are loyal, their customers are loyal, and their customers talk about the brand online. So much so, this brand is now, it's won so many awards from Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, Red Magazine, Tatler, all because it's been very authentic in its CSR. The other thing when you're working with your corporate social responsibility and you're letting it lead, you're making the right kind of relationships with your celebrities, your social media marketing influencers. There's no point having a relationship with a social media influencer if they're not adhered or they don't buy into your values. And then I just wanted to sort of show you some of the brands that have been doing it for a very long time. Ben & Jerry's, they're the forefathers of CSR. I say forefathers, it was started by two men. They've now sold to Unilever, but they're still very committed to the CSR initiatives. Lego, you might think plastic, but Lego has really been committed for a very long time on its CSR policies. They created about 4 years ago a piece of Lego that has been created from sustainable sugarcane, so it's biodegradable. And it's also said now it's going to make sure all its packaging by 2025 is sustainable. Another brand that really talks about its CSR across its website, across all its communications, and it's a very simple value that it has, and that is honesty. While it's really simple, it's a very difficult one to do because you have to make sure your supply chain is honest, whoever you're working with is honest, and if that honesty goes wrong, if you destroy that honesty, then you're going to destroy the trust that those consumers have in the brand. But they've kept it very simple. They've just got two values, honesty and trust. And while they sound really easy to do, it's very difficult. The Guardian is another one that's, people will probably call The Guardian woke, but it's been very committed to its sustainability policies. And The Guardian is just one aspect now. Lots of media have an ethical green arm to it, from Bloomberg, Reuters, The Independent, and they're looking for CSR stories, they're looking for ethical brands. And we know in this room it's very difficult to get coverage. You're competing against lots of other things. But if you have a strong CSR, authentic story, remember they're not fairy tales, then you'll cut through and you will start to gain that media traction. The other thing is social media, your own media that you have with Twitter, whether you call it X, Facebook, Instagram. These are great channels to communicate a brand's CSR initiatives. And it also encourages the consumer to get involved and be part of that story. So I talked about my book, and I mentioned that we have a great affinity with stories. And what I wanted to do in the book was make it different. And I interviewed 15 global thought leaders from around the world. One was somebody called David Katz. And David Katz he's created something called a plastic bank, where he's empowered local communities to turn plastic into a currency. And when I interviewed David in 2020, one of the things he said, and it was so powerful, and he didn't mince his words, he said, cut the bullshit. Brands just need to do better. That's it, it's that simple. And there are so many other stories, and what I've tried to do in the book is curate that wisdom and that knowledge so that we can all learn from people who've done CSR and people who've made mistakes with it as well. And it's up to us. It starts with us. And I just want to read you something from the book, if I may. And it's a report that came out. It was a report done by the UN, by a think tank called Sustainability, and by Ketchum PR. And this is what they said. The media sector could become the dominant industry of the 21st century. No other industry will so powerfully influence how people and politicians think about CSR and sustainable development practices. So it really does start with us. And I hope you will be on this journey with me to make more brands conscious of their corporate social responsibility. And that's me. Thank you. And if you do want to ask me any questions, I would love to answer them.